Well, imagine that you go to vote for sheriff and one of the candidates has never served as a police officer. He also is not qualified to be sheriff under state law.
A WIS investigation found that could be reality for some Midlands voters in the June primary. The Democratic Party allowed him to be a candidate.
Investigative reporter Cynthia Beasley showed proof to the Democratic Party that the candidate is not qualified, but they claim they can't do anything about it.
It brings up the concerns. How did he get on the ballot in the first place? And what happens if he wins the election?
Wallace Coleman Jr. has never run for public office. He's also never been a Class 1 law enforcement officer, but he's running for sheriff in Fairfield County. If you want to be a sheriff in South Carolina, the law says you must first serve as a Class 1 law enforcement officer certified by the state's Law Enforcement Training Council. In an affidavit, Coleman says he spent 14 years in that position. We contacted the Criminal Justice Academy. They said they have no records of Coleman being certified or going through training. I called Coleman to ask him about this. He says he was a constable and didn't know he wasn't a Class 1 law enforcement officer. Despite his mistake, election officials say it's too late to change the ballots.
So I have a lot of the documents here.
Yeah, of
so
course.
Me showing you the affidavit where he says 14 years of law enforcement experience, and then me showing you documents from the Criminal Justice Academy saying he's not a certified officer. That's not enough to get him off the ballot.
No, not with us.
Jay Parmley is the executive director of the South Carolina Democratic Party. State law says political parties must verify candidates' qualifications.
It doesn't tell us how.
Parmley says they did verify Coleman's qualifications by taking Coleman's word for it.
So the verification process for coroner and for sheriff is we accept their sworn statement.
And state law calls for this. It says a person running for sheriff must file a sworn affidavit affirming the person meets all the qualifications to be sheriff.
This affidavit is a sworn testimony. As long as this is given to us, you can't get a bigger legal document than this.
Parmley says there are two ways to exclude a candidate. The first, a formal written challenge from a registered Democrat. This isn't an option anymore in this case because the window for a challenge is only a few days before the party certifies candidates. The second option, sue the Democratic Party.
No one is challenged in this situation.
Nobody.
If nobody sues, and if this person does win this election and goes on to be sheriff, he is not qualified to be sheriff.
No, he's not. And
Does that not-
if this is the process. There's no.
But does that not worry you? Is it a flawed process? Does it not worry you that people who might not be qualified are going to be in that elected
We have
position?
asked the General Assembly multiple times to change this law. We only have a 5-day period to certify hundreds of candidates. And that is ridiculous.
Over at the State House,
Yeah, totally agree.
Representative Brandon Newton, the majority whip for the House GOP, says Republicans and Democrats agree. 5 days is not enough time for them to certify hundreds of candidates.
It's very difficult for them to do that in 5 days, and it causes lots of problems like this.
Newton introduced legislation to give parties more time by shortening the 2-week filing period before the certification period begins.
If you shorten it by 2 or 3 days, you would give the parties 2 to 3 extra days to do all their certification and not change anything. In this 5-day period, they have to turn into professional accountants and investigators for these offices, and they just can't do it. They don't have the manpower. In this case, it's a great example. It allows someone on the ballot who shouldn't be on the ballot because of their qualifications, and here we are.
Representative Newton said the legislation didn't really go anywhere in the House this year. He says it's always been attached to larger pieces of legislation and then left out. Next year, though, he does plan to file the bill on its own. As for Mr. Coleman, like we said, he will be on the ballot in that June 11th primary. I spoke to him on the phone and asked him for an on-camera interview. He never got back to me. For WIS Investigates, I'm Cynthia Beasley.
Cynthia, thank you. Now you can read the law and the documents Cynthia found for yourself on our website, WISTV.com. Just go to the WIS Investigates tab and look for this story.